Hola, ¿cómo está? Buenos días a todos. ¿Qué tal? Les saluda Walter Segura. Vamos a empezar el meetup número 15 de nuestra comunidad Site for Business Community de Sponsored by UTEC. El día de hoy tendremos una, una invitada de lujo que es Marisa Curry, justamente con Carlos Calderón. Este, y antes de empezar el meetup, queremos hablarles un poco de la comunidad Data Science for Business, ¿no? Eh, 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 Antes de empezar a hablar de la comunidad, que queríamos traer a cuentación un dato, un caso importante. Mayormente en el mundo, esto lo dice McKinsey, lo dicen otras empresas o consultoras en el mundo a través de los datos mundial, este, el 88% de datos de proyectos de data science en el mundo que se realizan nunca llegan nunca llegan a ver la luz, o sea, nunca tienen éxito, nunca llegan esto a producción. Mayormente, digamos, 1 de cada 10 proyectos de ciencia de datos no llegan a encontrar una solución, no llegan a producción y no se llega a desplegar del todo. Esto se debe prácticamente a 4 causas principales, según los estudios, ¿no? El primero es el entendimiento, el sentimiento del negocio en sí, donde muchas veces nosotros no entendemos para qué hacemos los proyectos de datos. Mayormente nosotros los hacemos y nada más. O simplemente porque nuestra competencia o en el caso de otras empresas lo hacen, puede ser exitoso aquí. El segundo punto es los problemas de la recolección de datos. Una vez que yo ya tengo mi equipo de ciencia de datos, lo que vemos, encontramos bastantes problemas. Uno de los principales problemas es en la colección de la información y de la data, ¿no? Donde muchas veces el científico de datos o el equipo de científico de datos batalla mucho en el tema de la recolección de los datos y sobre todo en el tema de la automatización de esto, ¿no? El tercer punto es la parte técnica, que viene a ser que los sistemas o los software que nosotros utilizamos en el momento de manejar y controlar la data no se encuentran del todo correcto o de todo bien, o no entendemos muchas veces el tema de procesamiento de datos. El cuarto es la incompatibilidad de sistemas, que muchas veces, y eso tiene que ver mucho con el desarrollo de las APIs, el tema de la tecnología en realidad, donde tienen que conectarse y todo tiene que conversar, ¿no? Ya sea tu ERP con tu sistema CRM, por ejemplo, muchas veces este tipo de interconexión. Eso implica tener un ecosistema de datos un poco más grande. En ese aspecto, en todo ese contexto, nosotros somos un grupo de personas que nos hemos asociado a través de justamente de la primera o segunda promoción de Data Science for Business de la UTEC y formamos esta comunidad, justamente viendo ese problema, viendo esas brechas que les comentaba hace un momento, ¿no? Donde realmente sí tenemos un reto muy grande y enorme, este, donde queremos cerrar esa brecha, ese gap que existe entre el negocio y sobre todo utilizando las datas, ¿no? Con el hecho de poder generar valor hacia las organizaciones. En ese sentido, nosotros acabamos de cumplir un año dentro de la comunidad. Nosotros ya tenemos más de 14 meetups, desde como 15. Han venido expertos, CDOs, CEOs, y heads of data de todo, tanto locales, regionales e internacionales. Hemos tenido expositores dentro de banca, retail, seguros, tecnología, gobierno, de todo tema de la academia, de hacer las escuelas y las universidades. Hemos trabajado en temas de analítico Open Data. Nosotros tenemos un equipo, si es la primera vez, si es la primera vez que vienen, puedo comentar, sí, pero si ya has venido anteriormente, te das cuenta que Américo y Alma siempre nos hablan de todo el proyecto de datos que ellos vienen realizando con los datos abiertos del gobierno y sobre todo el tema de la pandemia en los últimos meses, ¿no? Y sobre todo nosotros somos un equipo multidisciplinario. Tanto nosotros dentro del equipo, dentro de la comunidad, tenemos de todo, desde personas estadísticas, ingenieros estadísticos, ingenieros de sistemas, comunicadores sociales, hasta incluso abogados, y justamente eso es lo rico de tener ese tipo de espacios donde nosotros podemos discutir y hablar un poco más de cómo podemos transformar las data en algo mucho más aplicativo, ¿no? Que no solamente quede en un reporte, en un informe, sino ir más allá en eso. En ese sentido, para todos nosotros, el reto que tenemos es muy grande. El reto que nosotros vamos a hacer es la brecha, como les había indicado, entre el negocio y el data science, es enorme, donde nosotros tenemos que generar valor resolviendo problemas con los datos, ¿no? En ese sentido, nosotros ponemos a disposición de todos estos eventos, los meetups que tenemos, las lecturas y otras cosas más que hemos estado avanzando. También el tema del análisis de datos, el tema por ejemplo, la analítica de los eventos, del Open Data. Y justamente queremos generar eso, discusión y traer expertos que nos digan, que nos puedan indicar a nosotros qué es lo que están haciendo y cuál es la casuística en el mundo, en todo en toda Latinoamérica y el mundo, para ver cómo nosotros podemos generar aún más valor con los datos y así poder, ser pioneros en eso en el Perú y poder evangelizar este tema de los datos a nivel local y regional. Muchas gracias. Eso es lo que queremos comentarles un poco de la comunidad. Muchas gracias por ello. Le doy el pase ahorita a Carlos Calderón y que ya va a empezar un poco el meetup. Muchas gracias por su tiempo. Muy amable.
Muchísimas gracias, Walter. Un placer reencontrarte después de algún tiempo que no nos veíamos así personalmente. Un placer enorme reencontrarme contigo, con Miki, y con todos los que se están uniendo a nuestro magnífico webinar de hoy. Un día especial. Vamos a tener una invitada de lujo a quien voy a presentar en unos minutos ya en inglés, ¿no? Maritza, so welcome to our data talk, and excuse me some minutes to present first in Spanish, then we switched to English to continue with our data talk with you. Ok, solo un par de minutos, permítame hacer los temas de rigor, darle las gracias, por supuesto, a la comunidad, primero que nada, a Miki, a todo el equipo de la comunidad de Ciencia y Datos, y también, como siempre, a UTEC por sponsorizar la comunidad y por darle el soporte para que pueda seguir creciendo en este propósito de promover a la ciencia y datos como una disciplina para crear valor en el mundo de los negocios. He preparado un par de láminas rapiditas solo para ayudarme a presentar a Maritza en español y luego, por supuesto, vamos a pasar al inglés. Voy a compartir un par de láminas. Como saben, pues hoy día estoy representando a la Academia de Ciencia y Datos e Inteligencia Artificial de UTEC. Yo, como saben, soy el socio y además director, fundador de la academia, donde estamos desplegando un esfuerzo desde hace un par de años en el propósito que ya compartimos, por supuesto, con la comunidad también. Ustedes son, digamos, nuestras primeras expresiones profesionales que han pasado por la academia y han recibido parte de sus cursos, así que simplemente mencionar que lo hacemos en ese contexto, ¿no? Esta difusión de los temas relacionados a la ciencia de datos vinculada al mundo de los negocios. Bueno, como les decía, hoy día vamos a tener este enorme placer de compartir con una experta del mundo de la ciencia de datos, Maritza Curry. Espero estar pronunciando su nombre correctamente. Maritza, I expect my pronunciation of your name is correctly. Maritza Curry, okay? Well, en español, Maritza es bachiller en psicología industrial. Tomen nota de eso, chicos, chicas. Bachiller en psicología industrial en la Universidad de Stellenbosch, en Sudáfrica. Además, ella tiene un MBA en la misma escuela, en la Escuela de Negocios de la misma universidad. Ella lleva una larga trayectoria, casi 20 años, trabajando en prestigiosas instituciones en Ciudad del Cabo, en funciones relacionadas con datos y analítica, con casi 20 años de experiencia profesional relacionada al mundo de los datos y la analítica. Su trabajo ha estado muy centrado en ayudar a las organizaciones, tanto en Sudáfrica como en Australia, en formular y ejecutar sus estrategias de datos desde el año 2012. Ella se ha convertido recientemente, hace algunos años, en la Head of Data de RCS Group, ¿no? Una compañía de servicios financieros, miembro de BNP Paribas, un banco global que todos conocen. RCS es una compañía vinculada, participada por BNP Paribas, y donde ella es Head of Data. Maritza, además, representa a RCS dentro de la comunidad de Chief Data Officers en BNP Paribas, es parte de ese consejo. Y lo más reciente, ella ha sido seleccionada como una de las top 100 mejores innovadores en datos y analítica a nivel mundial por Corinium, esta institución que está catalogando en sus primeros pasos, por supuesto, a los más reconocidos expertos en el mundo de la ciencia de datos a nivel mundial. Entonces, bueno, quería simplemente presentar a Maritza como corresponde. Ella es una experta que nos va a regalar parte de su tiempo el día de hoy. La presentación será en inglés y vamos a tratar este tema, Modernizing Data Governance. Es la primera vez que yo tengo acceso a esta visión sobre el gobierno de datos, con lo cual va a ser supremamente interesante escucharla. Vamos a entrar entonces a modo inglés y si quieren las preguntas las pueden hacer en el chat en español y yo puedo hacer la traducción de las preguntas en la parte final, pero lo más importante, por supuesto, va a ser escuchar a Maritza. Okay, Maritza, sorry for use this first part in Spanish to present you, and at this moment, please permit me offer you the welcome to the data talk, and obviously it's a pleasure give you here with us, and at this moment we pass the presentation for you, and please continue in English, don't worry, and at the end the question we translate to English will begin the conversation with the participants. Welcome, Maritza.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here because I get to talk about one of my favorite subjects in the world, and that is data governance. And I think it is one of my favorite subjects because I believe that the data and analytics industry, and in fact most organizations, have neglected to develop data governance as a discipline and as a competence. And we're in such a unique position right now to modernize or revitalize data governance because we live in the knowledge economy. And we are sourcing and acquiring data in new and wonderful ways. We are storing it in different ways. We are using and sharing it in different and new ways. And if organizations want to compete on data and analytics in the knowledge economy, we have to manage and nurture our data as a real organizational asset. And I think this is where data governance can play a really important role. So let's get straight into it and look at the current context of data governance. So how does it really fit into our industry? What is the current state? So if we look at data and analytics trends over the last few years, you'll see that data governance only emerged as an industry trend around 2015. So very, very recent, and kind of started to build up towards 2018, 2019, when we started talking about data ethics, we started talking about sort of BI platforms and data management of our new data platforms. So if we look ahead at 2020 and beyond, where do you think data governance features now? So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it. I used about 17 sources to come up with this list of top 6 trends. And there's no surprise that AI is the #1 trend. But what is very interesting is that data governance is a #1 trend with automation and AI. And I don't think that surprises me at all, because like I say, our data and analytics environments are changing so quickly that it's become absolutely imperative for organizations to start focusing on data governance and data management. So if we define the problem, most companies, unless you are a charity or you have a monopoly in your environment, your business environment, every single company is competing in very harsh business environments, and we are using data and analytics to compete in these business environments and to get ahead, to get a leapfrog to other organizations. But the reality is that we are also operating in highly regulated environments, specifically in banking. So the question is, how do we deal with this dichotomy in the industry or in our different industries? Because on the one hand, we've got to use data and analytics to compete. So we've got to store data in the cloud, we've got to use AI, we've got to use customer data to predict customer behavior. But at the same time, there's legislation that is regulating how we are using that data. So the answer to this is that we have to make 3 shifts in our organizations to modernize data governance. And those 3 shifts are basically to move away from this very compliance-driven imperative around data governance to making sure that data governance is something that's actually driving business value, but also that it's an enterprise competency. And this speaks to ownership, because I think ownership is one of those debates that has been raging for a very long time. And, it's probably going to rage for a few more years. And then thirdly, data governance has to be non-intrusive. It can't become something that's a burden to the people in our organization. It's something that people want to do because they see the value in it, and it's not taking away from their actual jobs, their day-to-day jobs. So if we get into the first trend, and this is shifting away from a compliance-driven data governance competency to more of a business value-driven competency, then again, I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about this. But in your organization, what is driving data governance? And there's a few options here, quite diverse, from big data to better decision-making to regulation and compliance. So what the research says, and this is an urban study that was done in 2017, it's quite old, but I think it's still very, very relevant. No surprise here that 60% of the respondents in this particular survey said that regulation and compliance is driving data governance. And you can see the more business imperatives like big data, analytics, reputational management, that's kind of lower down. So definitely no surprises there. Right, so how do we actually use data governance to unlock business value? And there's 3 ways, and I'm going to give you some examples. These are real examples from organizations that I've worked with before, and it's really practical things, and I'm hoping that because they're so practical and because they are real examples, that you will be inspired to take these thoughts and ideas back to your organizations with the realization that it is absolutely possible to almost humanize data governance. So Let's get into the first one. So, if you're going to drive business value, it stands to reason that you have to align to the organizational strategy. And this is where data and analytics specialists often miss the mark. So we put our data strategies together, but we never quite make that connection to the organizational strategy. This is a very simplified data strategy map. If anyone's interested in this template, it is my template. I created it, so I'm more than willing to share it. So just send me a message on LinkedIn. But basically what this drives is to make sure that we actually think through where data governance fits in. Because if you look at data governance and data management disciplines, it's huge. It's just such a big industry. So there's about 10 different disciplines. So how do you know which of those disciplines actually is fit for purpose for your organization? And the best way to do that is to make sure that your data governance strategy actually supports not only your business strategy, but also your data strategy. So in this example, let's look at operational efficiency strategies. The best way to do that in this case or for this organization was through real-time operational analytics to provide information at the point of decision-making. But that definitely poses a challenge for data management. If you're streaming data in real time through your organization, how do you manage something like data quality management? Because you still have to ensure the quality of that data. And the answer there was to automate data quality and to actually build it into the data pipeline. So that's one way in which you can do it. Something else that's really important is to make sure that data governance and data management supports your end-to-end data value chain. This is a very simplified, modern data conceptual architecture. So you'll see it's very focused on streaming data in real time through the environment into an enterprise data lake, making that data available to advanced analytics and to your data scientists. But what is important here and what really drove the almost alignment of every single thing that this organization did around data governance, whether it was more in the traditional environment or advanced analytics, was to make sure that data governance and data management principles and practices were defined not only within the data platform, which in a lot of companies traditionally we think is the data warehouse, but right from source right through to the way that people actually use data. So you can see at the bottom, you've got a few examples of how this was done. Metadata management, for example. Yes, there was definitely an imperative to make sure that business understands the concepts that they were using, specifically the data scientists. It was quite a complex business. So the data scientists had to understand the business concept that they were working with. So business glossary was very important. But at the same time, the data dictionary was also important because the data scientists had to understand where to actually find the data that they needed to build their models. And they needed to do that really quickly. They had a very, very short life cycle. The third thing that we need to do to drive business value is actually to almost switch it around and say, well, how can advanced analytics and AI actually help us to better implement data governance? And this particular company, they were very focused on the bank. So they had very specific goals that they had to implement from a data strategy point of view, specifically around data management, and also from a legislative point of view. So they had to implement a metadata management tool, and those tools are very expensive because they're very, very sophisticated, but they wanted to make sure that the entire organization, the entire bank, have access to the data dictionary and the business glossary, because data understanding was something that they wanted to drive throughout the entire organization. But because of the cost of licensing, which was absolutely inhibitive, they had to think around, okay, but how do we make this information available? And the solution was to build a metadata management chatbot. So the metadata management tool and the meta model that sat behind it became the source for, or the plan was that it would become the source for the chatbot. And in that way, you made this information available to a very wide audience without having to spend too much money on licensing. And the interesting thing was that the vendor was very excited about this. And in fact, they had implemented something similar with other clients. So this was quite an interesting initiative. Right. So the second shift is to kind of get away from data governance as an IT-led initiative to something that's business-led but IT-enabled. So like I said earlier, this talks to ownership. So again, thinking about your own organization, who actually owns data governance? What does your data ownership and data stewardship model look like? So again, some diverse options here. Take a second to have a look. Right, so let's look at what the research says. So basically, in terms of who's responsible for data governance, the same Irwin study that we talked about earlier, interesting that almost 50-50, the split between business and IT or your data office, depending on where data governance is managed, and only 20% of the respondents thought it's actually both IT and business that own data governance. The other study here was from CIO Watercooler's data governance survey. And the question was that, okay, but who owns the challenge of meeting data regulations? And only 9% of people thought it's actually business. Very interesting. At least 50% of the respondents thought it's both. This research is by Blanco, and the question was, what does the structure of your data governance team look like? Who are the representatives? And not surprising, IT security, 70% of respondents said that it's more of an IT function, but only 16% said that they have business representatives in their data governance office or their data office. So with that view, where it looks like most companies still think that IT is responsible for data governance or owns data, how do we actually shift away from that? How do we unlock data governance as an organizational competency? And again, I'm going to take you through 3 examples. The first one is the organizational structure that you put in place for data governance. Now, data governance is not about technology. Data governance is about people, and it's about changing people's behavior. It's changing the way that people are thinking and using data. And in this particular company, a very well thought through structure was put in place where there was decision making at different levels. So right at the top, there was a data steering committee, and the data steering committee had representation from the ExCo, as well as the CEO. And this is where executive decisions were made. And in fact, the data steerco was the highest authority on data governance and data management in this organization. And they drove the business value that the organization was getting from quite a significant investment in AI. But that was only 50% of their function. The other 50% of their function was to make sure that the correct projects were being prioritized, to make sure that that they were building a virtuous ecosystem for AI, and that was very focused on data management and data governance. And then on the operational level, they had a model governance subcommittee. And this was interesting because it had different representation, and it wasn't just data scientists on this subcommittee, there were business people as well. So it was a very good co-creation and collaboration between business and the data scientists. But basically no model could go into production unless it was signed off by the model governance subcommittee. And they had to answer questions around potential data ethics issues, potential privacy issues that a model could, or the outcome of the model could maybe bring about. And interestingly, this particular company was challenged at one point on the ethics of the results of one of their models. And their response was, it was highly publicized. It was a huge PR challenge for this company, but they were able to respond to this crisis very quickly because of the fact that they had such a rigid model governance process. So they could answer any questions really quickly on whether there actually was a data ethics issue. What's also interesting here is that you need representation from every single division, so your entire business value chain. And why this is important is to make sure that data governance isn't just discussed from an IT point of view and a technical point of view, but also from a business point of view. So your business divisions can give that input. And then also from a people point of view, because there is actually an impact on people when you implement data governance. When you have stewards in the business, they have to do additional work to their day-to-day. They become responsible for data quality management. They become responsible for updating the business glossary, for example. So really important to have a very wide representation. The best way you can resolve data governance problems is really to have a very diverse view. And then thirdly and lastly, you have to embed data governance within your data and analytics structures. So this company had a very big data office. When I left there, probably around 180 people. So that's really big for a data team. But what they did was they had a matrix structure, delivery structure. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the different competencies in data and analytics, of which data governance was a very, very important one. But then they had sort of functional or business-focused delivery teams with representation from each of these competencies, including testers and data governance analysts. And what this did was, for the business delivery teams, it actually drove the data culture, because the data analyst or the data governance analyst made sure that the delivery teams adhered to standards and policies when they developed new data products. And what was very interesting was that this company had an innovation and data strategy delivery team who focused solely on data innovation. But that collaboration between the innovation team and the data governance analyst actually opened up some new ideas around how we can use machine learning and AI to implement data governance. So in fact, this is the company that I used as an example before, where the decision was to use a chatbot to drive data understanding in the organization. Right, so the third shift is to simplicity. So when most people think about data governance, they think about a very rules-based, kind of a heavy, almost like almost a resentment, because there's all of this extra stuff I have to do just to get my job done. So how do we move away from that traditional view to something that's simple and non-intrusive? So have a look at the options here and think about what is stopping your organization from implementing data governance. What are your challenges? So what the research says is, again, not surprising, the cost of data governance is definitely the biggest concern. But second to that, almost half of the respondents said that the culture, the organizational culture, might be a challenge. So how do we actually make data governance fit for purpose for our organization? Right, so 3 ways in which we can do this. Firstly, this, by the way, is not an academic model. This is something that I've put together based on my experience with very different organizations, different industries. And when you look at the complexity of organizations, you know, startups, normally there's not a lot of complexity. Business processes are kind of laissez-faire. But then if you look at big banks like BNP Paribas that we work for, there's a lot of complexity because we have entities in 30 countries. So in each of those countries have different legislation. So that makes, from a data governance and data management point of view, the environment quite challenging and complex. And then, you know, you also have to look at what is the offensive attitude of the organization. So different industries have a different balance between offensive and defensive data strategies. On the one hand, if you are in banking, then you're going to be more on the offensive side because banking is highly regulated. But if you're in retail, then you're going to be more on the defensive side because retail isn't that highly legislative, but it's very, very competitive. So I'm not going to go through all the options on how you can implement or align data governance to your culture. I'm just going to talk through the 2 extremes, which is sort of in the bottom left-hand corner here. For example, a company or a colleague that I've collaborated with before works for a startup, and they basically do data and analytics as a service to their clients. And it's in the advertising industry. Now, their focus on data governance and data management was very narrow and quite shallow because they didn't have a lot of complexity. And their only focus was data quality because that was the most important thing for them. They had to deliver data products really quickly. There wasn't a tolerance for process-heavy data governance discipline or competencies. So they had to do things very quickly. So they had data governance light. And their focus was, they had a sole focus on data quality because their customers or their clients relied on them to provide quality insights. And you could only do that if your data was of a high quality. Then on the other hand, top right-hand corner, so again, I'm going to use RCS Group and BNP Paribas as an example. Like I said, a very, very complex environment for BNP Paribas, being in 30 different countries. So the way that we approach data governance is very wide. We look at a lot of the data management disciplines, not just data quality. We look at metadata management, IT security, etc. But it's very, very deep. So BNP is very, very good at providing guidance and directive in terms of the data governance operating models that we have to implement, which covers technology, people, and processes. So really important that you make sure that your data governance initiative is actually supporting or in line with your culture. Otherwise, you are going to get quite a bit of challenge and resistance. Rightio. So very important that data governance is also embedded in your existing business processes. This is a little bit hazy because I had to copy it from a YouTube video, and I want to encourage everyone to go watch this video. It was a webinar by Doug Mirsky and Mark Dermerest, and it was presented by IIA. So you can go find it on YouTube, but basically what they presented was an analytics life cycle. And again, you know, analytics, it's got to be something that's flexible and agile, but how do you make sure you don't compromise that agility with too many policies, too many standards? And what's interesting here is, and why I really like this life cycle, is what they've built into it was decision rights. And there's this very specific decision rights across the business, again, representing all the stakeholders, all the divisions in your organization at different phases of this life cycle. And I'm just highlighting 3, but what I want to show you is that the data office or the chief data officer is involved right from the start. So even if you have a AI POC that you're launching, at that point, you want to include the data office, because this is where the data governance analyst can really provide a lot of support and knowledge around data ethics, and make sure that very early on in the process, those are the things that are thought about, and that you don't get to the end of the process where your business case has gone through and you realize you can't actually implement because there is a serious potential privacy or data ethics issue. And even worse, you implement it, you productionize it, and you find the issue once you're in production, and you have a huge challenge around the reputation of your organization. So again, a very good example of how you can involve data governance right through your process, beginning to end. And then lastly, just a little bit more on the fact that if you are building advanced analytics competency in your organization, you have to think about how you can make data governance more flexible. Because the reality is that in your more traditional environment, you know, that's where you want to be more rigid about data governance, because you are probably sharing information with third parties, so predefined reports with institutions, compliance institutions, etc. So you want to be very rigid around your data governance. You want to be very rigid around who gets access to information. So data access actually has to be managed. It's got to be restricted. To make sure that only people who need to have access, or that your users have access to what they need and nothing more. But then if you look at the bottom half of this diagram, when it comes to your analysts and your data scientists, you have to answer questions really quickly. You know, you can't be that rigid. So your data governance approach has to be more flexible. It doesn't mean we do not have policies and we do not have standards, for example, real-time data streaming, or for enterprise data lakes. We do, but they're not as rigid as it would be for our data warehouse or our ODS. And at the same time, you also want to make sure that your analysts and your data scientists have access to any and all data in your organization, because you're not talking about a huge audience here. You're probably talking about 15 or 20% of your users. So very important to find this balance between your defensive and offensive data governance strategy. Rightio. So that's the end of my presentation, Carlos. Shall we go to questions?
Thank you, Maritza. Really delicious, incredible, the new concept for us, for me particularly, but I am sure that for our colleagues is the same. Really, it's the new paradigm about the data governance, really, no? Data governance is very, very important for the companies who are escalating, no, in their data-driven transformation process. Okay, well, modernizing data governance, obviously, is related with the business. In your presentation, obviously, is related with the business imperative, no? It's different than the old data governance, no? More related with the regulations and other things related with another areas of the company. But today, probably with the COVID particularly, it's more related with the business imperative, no? And the digital disruption is too, no? You mentioned about the necessary, for example, to do the metadata about for a chatbot, for example, no? This is really incredible, but it's necessary, obviously, no? Or the necessity to align the data strategy with the strategy of business, or the business strategy, no? Align the data strategy with the business strategy, to define obviously a framework to develop a data governance program, no? In the framework put off from the strategy, no, data strategy. So and I want to say that really I am impressed your professional evolution, because you are an industrial psychologist, and then you have a business administration master, but you are now in the core of the architectures and engineering of data. Please tell us about your develop of your career, but we need to know how you are involved in this part of the world of the data now. How happened?
So I actually changed careers. So like you said, I had a degree in industrial psychology. So I wasn't in IT at the beginning of my career. So in my mid-20s, I studied full-time again. I studied IT because I believed, and at that time it was just before Y2K. So, you know, there was this huge demand for developers, specifically junior developers, to do the grunt work on Y2K. And I studied full-time again because I felt at that point that I needed a career. And industrial psychology, my heart wasn't in it, and it wasn't something that I wanted to build a career with. But I had a lot of friends who were in IT, and it really spoke to me. And so I studied IT. And my first job was actually as an application developer. But when I started at this company, you know, on our first day we had induction, and we were introduced to all of the different teams in IT. And when I was introduced to the BI team, at that point, I didn't know what BI is. But the way that it was explained to us, and I just thought, oh, that's so glamorous, you know, because they work with it is, yeah, it's sexy. They work with the marketing team, and they create these beautiful dashboards. And right from the start, I knew that that's where I wanted to be. So I was very lucky that I got the opportunity at the same company to actually move to the data team. So that's where my data career started. You know, I also had a very personal ambition to become an expert in my field. So at that time, I set myself a goal, and I said, well, in 20 years' time, I want to be a data and analytics expert, and I want to be a specialist. And every decision that I took during my career, whether that was a new role or a new company, was taken in the context of that decision. And, you know, I was very clear on what the steps were for me to get to that point. First was to understand all the different disciplines in the data and analytics industry. So I was an ETL developer, I was a report developer, I was a BI business analyst, I was a BI project manager. Whatever opportunity I got to really understand a specific role, I took. And sometimes that meant I had to take a step down, or it was a lateral move, and that was fine because I knew what I was building towards. And then eventually I got to the point where I felt that I needed to learn more, and I needed to learn even quicker. And I knew that was going to happen through consulting. So I left the company that I was with at the time, and I became a consultant. And what a great decision that was, because I learned more in the next 3 to 6 years than I did in all the years before that, because you had different clients, different levels of maturity, and all of a sudden you were thrown into really difficult situations. And the client, you know, they're paying a premium for your time. They expect you to know what you're talking about. So very quickly learned that I actually needed to understand the business, because I was talking to the business first before I could even think about solution design or technology. And I realized I'm going to have to do something about, and that's when I did my MBA.
Beautiful history.
Thank you.
Really, congratulations. It's incredible history. We have some questions, but before I want to ask, give you a question related to the context related with the COVID. No, COVID push a new context for everybody. Okay, probably this is a unique moment, no, in our lives, no, and particularly I very interested in the pressure, the push with the data science teams or data and analytics teams, no, pressure to return the investment in these teams. So in this context, probably data ops emerge a new way to do governance quickly. No, but you mentioned a very important word, the balance into the speed, the business context, and the COVID imperatives, and at the same time to ensure that our compliance and our productivity using the data function. Obviously, this is probably the most important part of the modernizing data governance. What do you think about it?
So I think that COVID, like you said, it really pushed organizations to rethink how they're doing data and analytics. So all of a sudden, data and analytics became front and center, because we had real business challenges because of COVID, and we had to answer business questions faster than we have before. And I think that, you know, there was two kind of directions that organizations went into. The one was a realization that we've got to get back to basics. We've got to make sure that we've got the basics in place. Because for some organizations with their challenges, you know, to continue on an advanced analytics roadmap at that point would not have made sense. Basically, all they needed was information, very quickly visualized, executive dashboards, getting back to the basics. At the same time, I think there were other organizations that were much further in their advanced analytics roadmaps and maturity, where that gave them an additional push to get to a point where they can actually use AI to help them optimize their processes, to help them augment human decision making. And I don't think there's a right or wrong there. I think that each organization found its own way. But what I can say, just from my own experience and from some colleagues that I have spoken to, if an organization didn't have a real investment in data and analytics pre-COVID, that pain was felt once COVID hit. Because, you know, if you had to answer questions, business questions really quickly, and you didn't have the platform to do it, your manual reporting from data scientists and analysts just shot up. All of a sudden, maybe 20% of your day was spent on manual reporting, and all of a sudden it was 100% of the time. So that is a good realization, but I also hope that organizations will take the lessons that they learned during COVID, like centralizing analytics SWOT teams with representation from different divisions, implementing agile analytics or delivery processes. I hope that those lessons will continue post-COVID.
Excuse me, I was mute. Okay, there are some questions. One of them is from Carmen Herrera. She's asking about the methodology to measure the assets, no? Data assets, but a methodology to evaluate the data assets, no? You know how about it, or you can recommend some methodology to do evaluation about our data assets?
So if the question is to evaluate your current data assets, or is it you know, acquiring a new technology? But either way, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that is more related with the valuation, the data assets, like put a value in money. No, our assets is like an asset that you can put in your estado de resultados, no, in your profit and loss document. If you can do a valuation related to your data assets to put in your balance.
Mm-hmm. So infonomics is still a very young discipline, and not a lot of organizations are doing it. There's very specific challenges why it's difficult to measure the value of data and analytics in organizations. The one is that we don't always immediately see the impact of data and analytics. So sometimes it takes 6 to 12 months, and by that time, we've completely lost the connection between that value and the data product that we implemented. The other challenge is it's difficult to isolate the contribution of data analytics to a specific benefit. So, you know, it could be a combination of analytics as well as a new business process that was implemented. So, you know, if there's a discipline in your organization where before you implement a new process and a data product, that you can agree with the business that whatever benefit you get from it, this is the percentage that will be assigned from that benefit to data and analytics, you can overcome that challenge. And then the last challenge, I think, is actually assigning an actual value a monetary value to the benefit, because often your benefit is not easily measurable. So how do you measure better decision making? It's not impossible. You can absolutely do it if you understand what the problem is that you are solving. But basically, what I'm saying in summary is it's quite difficult to measure the value, but it's certainly doable. And if Carmen wants to have a further conversation about this, because I have done it in the organizations that I've worked for, then I'm happy to do an offline discussion on it and give her some guidance on some of the metrics that can be used to measure the value.
Yeah, thank you, Maritza. Another question is very, very important. It's in Spanish, but I selected because I think that is very, very important. What is the impact of regulation about habeas data or privacy in general? What is the impact in the data governance? How impact the data governance?
It's got a significant impact. And the problem with privacy legislation is that it was formulated, most of it was formulated pre-AI or pre-advanced analytics. So in South Africa, we've got the POPI Act that's only gone into effect now, but we've known about POPI from 10 years ago. That's when the legislation was first drafted. And 10 years ago in South Africa, you know, AI and advanced analytics was not as developed as it is now. So privacy legislation is very focused on our business areas and functional areas. There's not a lot of guidance around how do we actually deal with privacy that's not, how can I say, it's almost like future privacy. So if you think about predictive models, when we use data and we're combining data to build a profile of a customer and to predict their future behavior, that is privacy. We are predicting private behaviors in future, but legislation doesn't cover that. So it's very difficult to apply privacy legislation in our data environments. So my advice would be that as an organization, what you have to do is be very clear around what your data ethics principles are, and to build those principles into absolutely every single process. Yeah. For example, in my organization, we've got a technical committee. So nothing can go, no technical solution can go live, can be productionized unless it's been signed off by the enterprise architecture committee. Now, I sit on that committee. My job is to ask questions around privacy, data ethics. Is there a potential that a new technology can create a problem around privacy? Could we be challenged in future? So you have to build it, you have to enable it through every single process.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, it's more related with the ethics and reputation of your company. No, yes, it's
100%.
Totally agree. Jose Bizalot is asking in Spanish, is possible to measure the level of implementation, the data governance programs? There are a methodology to measure the advance related with the implementation of data governance program. No, particularly the question is related if you have experience in the governance or estamentos gubernamental, o sea, with the public governance. No, for example, you have experience in that sector, in that industry with the governance. The government.
I don't.
Sorry, government.
I don't. I've never worked in. Yeah. No.
But in general, in business environment, you know about the methodology or another thing to measure the advance of your implementation of your data governance program?
I do, but this is not an easy answer. So I would say that you've got to be very clear about what are the outcomes that you want from your data governance program. So is it better use of data? Is it better decision making? Is it to get rid of manual processes in your organization? You know, what are the KPIs that's going to help you measure that your data governance program has been implemented? Is it better data quality scores from your BI audience? So if you can define that, then you can measure it. But there isn't a single answer to this. It's going to depend on your organization and the goals that you've set yourself for your data governance program. So understand the problem that you're trying to solve. If you understand that, you can put down a KPI. Once you've got your KPI, you can benchmark it. And once you've got your benchmark, you can say, okay, in 3 years' time, once I've implemented my data governance strategy, where do I actually want to be? And then you can build up to that. You can say, this is my 3-year roadmap to actually realize that KPI.
Okay, well, our time is over, but I want to do a last question from Yesenia Peya. She's a quality engineer, and she said that, which is our most important mission in data governance projects, the perspective of quality engineering?
So I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, Carlos.
Yeah, the question is for a quality engineer, which is for them, she's our, no? She said our most important mission in a data governance projects or programs in that case. No? What is the mission in the data quality engineering? Normally, no? Say, or roles, yeah. Could be the roles too, no?
So I would say the critical success factor for any data governance or any data management process is, or project, is people, because it is all about people. It's about changing behavior. Even data quality management. Data quality management is about changing behaviors. So the answer for me is that it's people, because you're driving change. And when you're driving change, you're affecting people's day-to-day. And if you're affecting people's day-to-day, you've got to manage that change. Otherwise, you're going to end up with resistance, and you're not going to get the outcomes that you want. So don't ever forget to take people on the journey with you. So I've worked with amazing data governance analysts, data quality analysts, and I can tell you the one thing that they all had in common was that their first port of call was always collaboration with the business. Everything they did was in collaboration with the business.
People first, okay.
People first.
People first. Well, Maritza, we exceeded the time, but I was very happy to join to this with your presentation and hear your knowledge or your recommendations for us. We appreciate your time, and well, thank you very much. And I give you to can say goodbye to everybody, and then we continue with in Spanish with the rest of the presentation.
Thank you very much for the invite. I really enjoyed my time with you, And, you know, anyone who wants to link with me on LinkedIn, ask my questions anytime.
Well, perfect. Okay, incredible presentation. Thank you very much again. And well, we'll now switch to Spanish. Mis queridos Miki, Walter, Gerald, volvemos a español para dejarlos con la parte que toca, el protocolo que toca ahora. Fascinante presentación, encantado de la vida, realmente un aspecto importantísimo del mundo de la ciencia de datos, muy necesario en tiempos convulsos como los que estamos ahora.
Sí, sí, Carlos, totalmente de acuerdo. Thank you, Marixa, for your presentation. I really appreciate that. I enjoyed every minute that you shared all your knowledge with our community. And I switch to Spanish one more time. Gracias a todos los que disfrutaron de esta increíble velada y estos nuevos conocimientos, ¿no? Que hoy no los tenemos mapeados. Gracias con todos. Pónganse en contacto con la comunidad. Dejé los links por LinkedIn, el correo también de la comunidad. Estamos dispuestos a crecer juntos, ¿no? Y a participar como un solo equipo. Gracias. Bueno, dale, Walter.
Hola, hola, ¿cómo están? Muchas gracias por haber compartido. Thank you very much, Maritza. Vuelvo al español. Y muchas gracias por habernos seguido. Vamos a tener nosotros un poco más de noticias sobre la comunidad. Esperamos seguir contando con todos ustedes. Muchas gracias, Carlos, también. Un gusto verte de nuevo y esperemos seguir en contacto mucho tiempo más.
Gracias también, Walter. Tenemos una encuesta para los que nos han acompañado. Como siempre, agradecemos que se tomen un minuto para llenarla. Para nosotros es muy importante sus opiniones para seguir mejorando y desarrollando próximos eventos. Me despido, los dejo hasta la próxima. Gracias.